We are listening, and we know that this policy has not worked in too many ways and in too many places, and we need to get it right. And so we are determined through the course of conversation and the course of discussion with all parties to ensure that whatever is done in the future will address the issues and get them right.
That Education Secretary Betsy DeVos talking about the policies governing sexual abuse on college campuses. Now, the Obama administration, they issued guidelines that enabled schools to use a lower burden of proof than criminal courts require. It was responding to what many are calling an epidemic. But now, the Trump administration, they're looking at pushing the pendulum to give the accused more rights. DeVos argues that schools are overreaching as they try to assist the victims, but the offenders are not getting enough due process. And Candace Jackson, who's a top civil rights official at the Department of Education, had the following to say, quote, "Hundreds of cases are still pending because investigators were specifically told to keep looking until you find the violation. And investigative processes have not been fairly balanced between the accusing victim and the accused student." Jackson also said that 90% of accusations fall into that category that, quote, "we were both drunk and we broke up," end quote. Now, she later apologized and said the remark was flippant. But New York State is a leader in trying to protect victims. A couple of years ago, Governor Cuomo, he signed his Enough is Enough legislation to combat sexual assault. And 2 years before that, he appointed my next guest as director of the New York State Office of Victim Services, Elizabeth Cronin. She joins us now. Thank you very much.
Richard, thanks for having me.
Now, that quote that I just read was apologized for. In fact, the speaker of it said that she was flippant when she made the remark. Do you believe that's where the administration or the education department is coming from into this conversation? Or did they see the pendulum of justice being unfairly being pushed in one direction here, and that due process, as they said, wasn't being given to the accused?
Well, I think that any time a remark is made, whether the speaker says it was flippant or not, it says something about their state of mind. And so it seems to me that that is how they are beginning this conversation, where they have already drawn somewhat of a conclusion based on some anecdotal evidence and are attempting to set policy on the basis of that. And, you know, with sexual assault cases, what's been happening over the last 30 years is really just an attempt to level the playing field. You know, at the very bottom of this is that victims never got a fair shot, especially in sexual assault cases. So, and on college campuses, this has been shown time and time again. And you can, if you look at the statistics and the verifiable studies that have been done, this is actually woefully underreported rather than being overreported.
So I think a lot of our audience, I'll even put it in myself in personal terms, you think of this in your own ambit. I got 2 daughters, not old enough, but not too long from now, I'll go to college. I also got a younger son, though, and I try and put into this, and in prepping for this, you see these egregious cases both ways, and the numbers are staggering of women who are victims of assault while in their 4 years on campus. But then you read of the others and the standard, and explain this to me. Clear and convincing versus preponderance of the evidence. I think every Wednesday night we bring up legal cases, and it's always beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case. You got to be 100% sure, as close as you can, that the guy did it. In this case, talk about what the standard is right now and how it changed under the previous administration as to whether or not the accused, in fact, did commit an assault.
So we have to differentiate between what are criminal cases with the burden of proof, civil cases, administrative procedures. Are all very different. And what you're looking for as the outcome is very different as well. So in a criminal case, obviously, because someone's physical liberty is at stake, then beyond a reasonable doubt is, you know, the obvious choice. But even that is not beyond all doubt. I mean, I spent 14 years as a prosecutor, and I knew, you know, what I had to do to prove my case, but it didn't have to be beyond all doubt. In the civil context, those cases are preponderance of the evidence. So it's that it was more likely than not that the act happened. And these are like administrative procedures. You know, the person is not going to lose their liberty. They're not in danger of going to jail. These are...
But if I could there,
Sure.
the argument then becomes, Elizabeth, that, okay, they're not going to jail, but a kid's future, if you're talking a young 20-something, and let's use the scenario of co-eds, where he hasn't been convicted or hasn't even, they haven't even mitigated the process. He's not allowed to question his accuser, and he may lose his scholarship. He may be removed from school. He may lose, whether he's an athlete or whatever, a chance at whatever career beyond that. Could there still be harm done to somebody while the process is ongoing? It's not criminal, but even civilly here, are colleges, as the writer alleging, covering their backsides and harming the person, even if he hasn't been proven or, beyond any doubt here that he did it?
Well, the irony of that is that that is what happened to victims all of these years, where the schools were, and many still are, bending over backwards to protect the student athlete, the scholar. You think about that case in California at Stanford University, Brock Turner, where he was arrested. I mean, it was a criminal case, but after being convicted of felony sexual assault, he ended up getting, I think, 6 months and probation. And that's recent, so that's the uphill battle that victims are still fighting.
There's also the question, if I could, that
Yeah.
under due process and questions whether it's there or not, the Title IX, according to the new Education Department and these Dear Colleague letters, that their colleges are being blackmailed, that they'll lose federal funding here if they don't comply. Speak to that.
It's sort of funny because with some of the comments that the secretary made was that the Obama administration was, quote unquote, weaponizing the Office of Civil Rights within the Education Department. And I found that a really provocative term to use here because, as I said earlier, really what the administration was trying to do was, one, level the playing field for victims, because it's always been on the side of the accused, and also to make sure that that there are rules in place that are clear. And so these Dear Colleague letters were not really making regulatory decisions. It was trying to lay out more clearly for the universities what their responsibilities were. So most colleges were using the preponderance standard anyway. I mean, clear, convincing
and there was a public aspect. If you have your name on that list, that's not a list you want to be on. Finally, and we're seeing this in many different avenues, not just the Education Department. States are pushing back if they feel there's overreach by the federal government. What will New York do if, after this period of advisement, DeVos actually implement some of the more draconian levels, to certainly your perspective?
Well, I can't speak for the governor, but I can say that I'm very pleased to work for this administration and live and work in this state, because we really have protections that can go above and beyond what the federal government is doing. And, it's never a bad thing to look at policy. It's always a good thing to look at things with a fresh eye, but I think when you go into something with a preconception, then you're really not being fair. And it's taken a very long time to get victims to the place that we're even in. And so to me, it looks like we're going backwards. So the one thing I would just like to say is that even for victims who don't want to go through this process in school, there are places for them to get help. My agency funds multitude of rape crisis centers.
We do a lot of work with Hope Store, and there's many terrific organizations.
I used to be on the board there.
And I'm glad you put this in context, because it does seem that we're going in a direction that is surprising to, I think, most of us. But Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate coming in.
Now, coming up next, Stephen Spinot was murdered in broad daylight while he was in his Mamaroneck apartment, but the killer got away and has been on the loose for 10 years now. We're going to take a look with our friends over at the Journal News at a cold case that the police are still investigating.